Let's have a look at some introductions because we want to get to the top level. And even if we don't get to the top level of introductions, we can have a look at the second highest level, which is where a lot of people are. This is our introduction rubric, and we'll see that we've got the first level is literally you're just sort of throwing things out there. Maybe you talk about contention, maybe you talk about maybe just a summary of what they've done. The second one is you'll have a clear contention statement, but you might just sort of have a bit of a summary as to what's happening. And this is the one where most people want to get to, and that's that good old acronym FLAP, Form, Language, Audience, Purpose. So you're thinking about the relationship between the form, which in this case was a speech, the audience, which would have been not only the people in the room who may or may not have been winning awards that night, people, shareholders, those sorts of things, but also the general public watching at home. And the purpose. Now, there were two purposes because there were two different speakers, and they used different types of language. So you're talking about the relationship between those four things. Now, to get to the top level and to rise to the highest level of sophistication, you're basically doing FLAP, but you're also adding in this idea of context. So let's have a look at what that actually looks like. Now we'll look at it. We've got 3 examples here on the introductions page. And for each of these examples, I've tried to highlight for you the 5 things that are happening, but then also this idea of the relationship and how you connect those ideas. Okay. And so one of the easiest ways to connect the context to the actual form and to the purpose is to use this phrase, in response to this. So it makes sense to start off your introduction with some sort of contextual statement, okay, which, as you'll see, I'll get rid of all this stuff here, is in the yellow, okay, so context. This is about video games, this one. So with the increasing popularity of video games, especially in the younger generations, there has arisen numerous debates on the health effects and negative impacts of video games. How do we then show a relationship between that context and all of these other things? We use this phrase, in response to this. There's that pointing word. If you've done anything on nominalization, you'll know that this is a pointing word. It's pointing back to something that's happened previously in the paragraph. Author made a speech, which is our form, to audience. More context, at a student wellbeing information night. Purpose, she intends to persuade audience alike to present video game addiction in their peers and self. Using, so you're connecting a purpose to the language by using that word using or utilizing or through the use of. Her tone shifts between. So again, looking for those connecting words. So anything that's to do with a relationship is about connecting words. So you want to connect one idea or one group of sentences to the next. Okay, this is intended to. There's some ideas. You can read through those. Here's another one, which is about from the same piece about video games. I've used different colors there stupidly, but you can have a look through that one as well. But let's have a look at one that actually is from the piece that we've just done about the volunteers. Now this one doesn't actually get to that top level. It doesn't actually get to this top level up here, but it gets to it could get there very, very easily. Let's see how we could get there. So we begin again with the context. Now this context is not always explicit. Now that means it's not always going to be in the background information. It's not always going to be something that you read in the speech. It could be something that's implicit, so something that you are taking from your general knowledge, your brainstorming, your thinking about the ideas and the organizations and the stakeholders that are involved. Now we know from reading through this that there is a financial institution And we sort of think, as we're reading through and analysing, we think, what do we know about financial institutions and what do we know about volunteers and all those sorts of things? And you try your best to come up with some idea of a context. Well, what is happening with this speech? Now, there's a couple of things that this person's identified, either through the background information or just from their own sort of general knowledge. The first thing is that they're saying that there's a high proportion of Australians that are giving up their time, and that comes from the speech. But then they also say that Bennett is the CEO of the organisation. So that also sort of comes from the speech. Now, what they could have done as well is think, well, if you're the CEO of an organisation, the chief executive officer, and it's a financial organisation, you're probably wanting to use, why would they be giving money away? The only reason that corporations give money away is for either free publicity, to reduce their tax, or to basically bring some sort of positive spin onto their company in terms of public relations or PR. So quite easily that could be the context for this. Whole charade of an awards night is basically there because this corporation want to basically, in quotes, give something back to, the public, which actually means they just want the public to think that they are doing good deeds, when realistically all corporations only care about profits and shareholders. I'm not trying to be ideological there, that's a fact. So with a high proportion of Australians giving up their time to volunteer, many are not acknowledged. That's our context part. What we probably want to do there is say, well, in response to this, in response to the fact that so many people are giving up their time and unacknowledged, good old Stephanie Bennett, her bleeding heart, she wanted to help these people. So in terms of relating that, we just need to expand this in, which is a preposition. We just want to say in response, because it's something that the person who's writing this speech is responding to. Okay, and that will then get your connection between the context, the form, and their purpose. So why are they actually doing this? So in response to this, Stephanie Bennett, the CEO of Big Splash, is presenting or has decided to create an award for volunteers. In her speech presenting the award, she is contending that the appreciation of volunteers is essential, blah, 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 through her use of, that's a nice connection there, language, purpose. And then we get down here, more purpose, and then of course our orange is the audience. So the only thing that's really sort of missing from this is a little bit more of a link between this context, the form, the author, and then the purpose and the language. If you wanted to really up the ante, you'd probably want to link and tell us why she used specific appeals or specific language to target her audience. Because they're a fairly mainstream Australian audience, you could say, well, look, she's using appeals to Australian values. She's trying to really up the ante on appealing to our guilt, our sense of patriotism, because she knows that it's going to be broadcast to a wide television audience. So you could probably make those sorts of connections as well in your introduction. Let's have a look down here, because there are some people who didn't mention both texts in the introduction. This is how you do it. You're going to have two texts. There's no doubt about that. So basically you're writing an introduction that talks about the context, form, language, audience, purpose for the first text. And then the context and the purpose, the context for the second text will pretty much always be in relation to the first text. So in response to this speech, Matthew Newen gets up and he says his speech, because he says, well, thanks for giving me the award. So usually in the exam it's going to be either a comment or another blog or something that's in response to the first text, which is in response to some sort of external catalyst or stimulus or something that's happening. So you simply write exactly the same, context, form, language, audience, purpose, in whichever order you want. It doesn't have to follow that flap order for the second text as well. and you're done on your introduction then. So that's introductions, and that's what we ultimately need to be aiming for. If you can't think of a context and you can't really grab onto an audience, the best thing to do is to just hammer purpose, make sure there's a very clear contention statement, and make sure you try and summarize at least some of the arguments or the language that you're going to be talking about in your essay. Now, there's nothing wrong with writing an introduction last if you want. The examiner has to read it in the order that you say. So you could make a little note at the top of your page that says, please read introduction on last page first. Write your body paragraphs and then write your introduction at the end so that you know what your language is going to be. It's totally up to you how you do that. They don't take marks off if it's not in the right order because they have to follow the way that you explain that they need to read it. If you do that though, it's very important that you say, please read my introduction at the end first, and maybe underline that, because otherwise they'll be reading a body paragraph and going, what the hell is this person doing? They've launched into analysis without actually introducing their essay. So have a think about that tactic if you're someone who struggles with introductions because you're not quite sure what you're going to write until you've actually written it.